Well, my name is Bernabé Aki. I'm originally from Brazil, and I now am a senior at Kent State University in Ohio. But before I start talking about my actual project, I just wanted to kind of give a background for you to understand why I decided to go to Macau. And when I was 18, I started playing poker, and I loved it. And I started playing tournaments and traveling for it. And then I did that for 2 years, kind of like semi-professionally. And I found out because I wasn't 21 that the true gambling mecca was not Las Vegas, but Macau. Wait, this is weird. Okay, it's all good. Yeah, so I always wanted to go there to play poker, and then my freshman year of college, well, my sophomore year of college, I decided that I
Don't hold it
should
quite so close because you are a
like
little
this.
loud.
Oh, sorry guys. I apologize.
Okay, we're good.
I apologize. I'm
No,
sorry.
no.
So I wanted to go to Macau because it was a gambling mecca, but then I realized that that was a very simplistic way to think about a place as, oh, I want to go there and, go to the casinos and whatnot. So I started researching about Macau, and I found out that until 1999, Macau was a Portuguese colony, and Brazil was also a Portuguese colony, so that really sparked my interest in the region. And the more I studied about Macau, the more I became fascinated with how a place could be so different in the sense that it has been colonized by an European country for 350 years, and then it suddenly was handed back to China in 1999. And if you were not aware of where Macau is, I put a couple maps, and as you can see, that's a different map because you see the Americas are on the right. But yeah, so Macau.
Okay.
I don't know
Why
what's
don't we
happening.
just maybe use another
Yeah,
mic? It
this
might work
is.
better.
Sorry. This is a mess.
Let's hope that's not the next
I wasn't nervous, but now I am because I'm just screwing this up. Anyway, so what is Macau exactly? After 1999, it became a special administrative region of China, which means that it's an autonomous region. They have their own government, but they're still owned by China, and China technically has the right to interfere in whatever they seem suitable. Um, Cantonese and Portuguese are the official languages, so even though it was handed back to China, they maintain Portuguese as a official language of Macau, which was really exciting for me, and it was one of the reasons that I was like, I want to go to Macau is because I thought, oh, I can speak my native language and get by in Asia, which is not something that you normally think about. So my original idea was to mix my interest in the casino industry with my investigative journalism background, and I had heard a lot of positives about gambling in Macau, and apparently there is only positives from it. I was like, I want to figure out what are the negatives because every single report out there was talking about the positive outcome of um, a huge growth in the gambling industry and the casino industry in Macau. So I was like, I can do a different thing here. I can take a different angle, which is to talk to the local community and try to figure out if they have experienced increased gambling addiction rates, or if they think that the corruption through the licensing of casinos has affected them negatively in any way. And then when I arrived in Macau, which, as you can see, there are some very Portuguese architecture and traditional, like 400-year-old buildings, but it also has some of the world's most luxurious casinos, as you can see, the Wynn and the MGM. When I arrived in Macau, I was like, oh, there is no crisis. I was like, this is scary because this is supposed to be the crisis reporting, and I'm supposed to report on the casino industry crisis, and there are no crises. Everyone just loves the casinos. There are no increased rates in gambling addiction. I talked to many people there who just love the idea of a huge new industry plummeting their economy. So I was like, well, I guess I gotta find another crisis. And that's when I realized that I was there for a few days and I hadn't talked in Portuguese to anyone, which was really weird because I assumed that there would be a fair portion of people who would speak Portuguese because it's one of their native languages. And as I started talking to people there, I found out that since 1999, there was a huge decrease in Portuguese-speaking people in Macau, as well as Portuguese influence in their culture, in their media, and just overall in their daily routine. Even Portuguese restaurants were beginning to go bankrupt because there were less interest from people. And as weird as that sounds, I looked at the numbers and they told me that that was the truth. So I found out that only 0.6% of households in Macau have Portuguese as their primary language. And that is including...
Here, just skip the mic.
All right.
Yeah, you don't need it.
And that is including...
And wave if you can't hear.
And that is including all of the Portuguese-born people in Macau. Even so, only 0.6% of households. And that's not to mention the fact that Macau is the most densely populated region in the world. So, well, aside from the Gaza Strip. So I talked to the Portuguese consulate in Macau and Hong Kong, and that was my interaction that was the most mind-blowing out of my almost 4 weeks in Macau. When I talked to the Vitor Sereno, he was the general consul for the consulate of Macau, of Portugal in Macau and Hong Kong. He told me that they had 12 full-time jobs open for 6 months, and they paid 40% more than the average salary in Macau for those 12 jobs. And they couldn't find qualified people because no one could speak Portuguese. And that was crazy because he said that at that time, they had 100,000 Portuguese passport holders in Macau because many of them had grandparents or great-grandparents who came from Macau. And they still couldn't find 12 people to work there, even though they were paying more than 40% more than the average salary. So I tried to talk to the people who were doing something to change the situation, to try to revive the Portuguese culture in Macau. And I found the Instituto Cultural de Macau, which is a branch of their local government that there's only focus is to promote cultural events, not necessarily Portuguese-related cultural events, but cultural events, period. And I talked to Rosina Choi, who is basically the communications director there, and she told me that since the last 2 or 3 years, because of this reduction in Portuguese-speaking people, they've literally included Portuguese acts or Portuguese performances in every single one of their events, strictly as a policy to try to bring back that local community interest. And the 2 major events that they have is the Macau International Music Festival and the Lusophonia Festival. So the first one is just a general music festival, international, but last year they had 6 acts that were Portuguese, not necessarily from Portugal, but Portuguese speaking, so a couple from Brazil, one from Angola. But this year, they only had 1 because one of the other acts that they were scheduled to bring couldn't make it. So that's kind of scary because the Macau International Music Festival is happening right now, and that's basically one of their major efforts to change the situation. And the second one is the Lusophonia Festival, which is a Portuguese-specific project that they have. So as you can see, that's a photo from the parade, and they basically had 20,000 people show up this past year compared to 18,000 people the year before. So you can see there's like an 11% increase in the number of attendees, which can be a good sign that people are coming to these events and trying to change the situation. But the one sad thing about all of this is that this is not really translating into people's interest in their professional lives or their even their personal careers. So they will show up to these events because they're fun and exciting, but they won't sign up to take Portuguese classes. And that's the main takeaway that I got from it, was that I couldn't really there are efforts being made, but they're not enough if they plan on changing the trend from something downward to something upward. So I wanted to end with this because I thought it was fun. So, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Pravina. I'm from Bickford College in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I traveled to India and I stayed there for a month to report on challenges and opportunities for women in southern India, primarily in the rural regions. So when I talk about challenges, they're primarily economic. So this means, these are some of the women I talked to, or first geography, I guess. So this is where I went. It was the southern state of Tamil Nadu because I speak the native language there, which is Tamil. And then the specific district that I went to was Tiruvannamalai, which is northern, and it's the light blue. Okay, so these are some of the women that I got to interview for part of my project. These are some of the portraits I did for them. And so when I talk about economic challenges, it's even if they had high hopes for their education or for their careers, they often had to give that up because of their family situation and their family burdens. Something important to note about Indian society is that family is the integral unit. As some of my peers have noted in their presentations, it often falls upon women to put their families before themselves. So that's what I found in my project, in the rural regions especially. So in terms of burdens, a lot of these women shared a lot of intimate stories with me when I interviewed them. So for example, the first woman, her name is Dhanalakshmi. She's 30 years old and she had been working in a medical clinic for 8 years. But 3 years ago, she had to stop working in the medical clinic because her mother became ill. Her mother wasn't even able to sit up without physical help from someone, and they don't have enough money to hire someone to help in their home or to visit hospitals to try to treat the illness. So she had to quit her job to take care of her mother. And then the second woman, her name is Nalina. She's 28 years old. She currently works in a clothing store. She supports her 2 children, her extended family, her parents, all on a salary of 4,000 rupees, which is equivalent to 60 US dollars per month. And she does all of this alone because her husband left her 4 years ago, right after the birth of their second child, because both of their children were born female. We see a lot of this preferential treatment with gender children in India because of things like dowry. So male children are associated with becoming educated and successful, while female children are associated with going to the household of the groom, whomever they marry, and primarily caregiving. So, but there are improvements being made in Indian society to kind of help these kinds of economic situations for women. And the 2 that I wanted to highlight in my presentation today are churches and women's empowerment groups. So the first picture here is of the Ulagamada Church, and that translates to Universal Mother Church. And then the women's empowerment group that I covered specifically in my story was called the Sakti Bengal Munnetra Sangam, which translates to Strong Women's Empowerment Group. So these 2, the reason why they're able to function as improvements for these women is because they're government approved and government sponsored. So they receive monetary support from the Indian government, and they can provide loans to these women who often don't have qualifications to receive loans from a state bank. And they also offer free training courses in handcrafts like sewing. So these women get trained for self-employment and they can receive an income. And the picture in the middle is an example of a certificate for self-employment of women who actually studied tailoring within the Ulagamada Church in 1994. So the second topic that I covered when I was in India was child marriage. I looked at 2 different couples to kind of give it a more narrative feeling so people could, I could bring more awareness for people with these stories. And so I'm going to show my video. I feel like it would give you guys a better picture of the story rather than just me talking about it. So in this video, I focused on one couple. The woman was married when she was 14 years old to her uncle. He was 27 years old, and they were married so young within the same bloodline because of financial assets and their family inheritance. So we're going to watch the video.
ஆரம்பத்தில் தான் கொஞ்சம் ரிஸ்க்காக இருந்துச்சு. அவங்க ஒருத்தருக்கு ஒருத்தர் புரிஞ்சிக்கல, அண்டர்ஸ்டாண்டிங் தெரில அப்போதைக்கு. அதனாலே அதுக்கப்புறம் 3 years ஆயிடுச்சு, அதுக்கப்புறம் எதுவும் தெரில.
அம்மா பொண்ணை கட்டு இல்லைன்னா அக்கா பொண்ணை கட்டு, வேற எங்கேயும் கட்டினா விட மாட்டேன். சுத்தலாம் என் பொண்ணு வேற யாரும் பழக்கத்து இல்லை, மொத்தம் அக்கா பொண்ணு கட்டினா கட்டு, இல்லை மாமா பொண்ணு கட்டு, வேற யாரும் கட்டத்துக்கு விட மாட்டேன்னு சொல்லிட்டு அக்கா பொண்ணே பிடிச்சி கட்டி வச்சுட்டாங்க. குழந்தை பிறந்தோடனே கால் வளவாகுதுன்னு சொல்லிட்டு சொன்னாங்க. கால் பிறகு சொல்லி வளவாகுது, சத்து இல்லை, அது இல்லைன்னு சொல்லிட்டு சொன்னோடனே டாக்டர் இங்கேருந்து போலது வந்துச்சு, இங்கேருந்து அடுக்கும் பறிக்க அமிச்சிட்டாங்க. அமிச்ச உடனே அவங்க நாங்க புதங்காம ஒரு 7 வாரம் சொன்னாங்க கட்டு அப்புறமா ஆப்ரேஷன் பண்ணாங்க. கட்டு பிடிச்சோடனே அப்புறமா கால் மாதிரி ஆகுது, இதுமாரி 4 வருஷத்துக்கு 5 வருஷத்துக்கு வர சொல்லிடுறாங்க. எழுந்து நடக்காங்காட்டி வர சொல்லிடுறாங்க 2 மாதத்துக்கு தட்டி.
கஷ்டமாச்சா?
ஆமாம், கல்யாணத்துக்கு அப்புறம் அப்படிதான். எங்கள் வீட்டுக்காரர் என் பாட்டிக்கு உடம்பு சரியில்லைன்றதுக்காக ஸ்கூல் நிறுத்திட்டாங்க. அதாவது காலேஜ் ஃபஸ்ட் இயர் படிக்கிறாங்க சின்னவன். இன்னொருத்த +2 முடிச்சுட்டு 1 மாதம் வேலைக்கு போனால் இப்போ வீட்டில் இருக்கான். எங்கள் பொண்ணு டாக்டர் ஆகணும்னு தான் ஆசை. அவன் டாக்டர் ஆகணும்னு தான் இன்ஜினியரிங் படிக்கணும்னு சொல்லுவான். ஏதாச்சும் ஒன்று ஆகணும்.
So as you can see, what I found from this story on child marriage is that it not only has implications on the woman's education and career, but also on the health of the mother and her children. So the last thing I wanted to talk about really quickly was the experience I had while reporting in India. I encountered a lot of resistance when I was interviewing, and so because I was a staff writer for my college's newspaper previously, and in such a concentrated population on a college campus, pretty much everyone is aware that there are student journalists around, so I was pretty comfortable conducting interviews, and people were aware that I would have my camera and be taking photos and doing video. But in India, like everywhere I walked, if I had my camera around, I got really suspicious glances and stares, and actually encountered police in one instance. They were very aggressive and because they had seen me taking a photo, so they were very aggressive and questioning me about what I was doing and stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that, especially in a country like India that doesn't really acknowledge or recognize journalists as much as we do in the United States. I learned a lot from reporting abroad and kind of reflecting on how it compares to reporting locally. And I just wanted to do acknowledgements really quickly. I'm really thankful that I got this opportunity from the Pulitzer Center. Thank you to Kem for editing my stories and being so helpful, and also my advisor Cheryl, who encouraged me to apply for the grant. And yeah, it was a really great experience, and I look forward to questions from you guys.
Hi, my name is Tomek Zebrat. I study at Washington University in St. Louis. And I'm from Poland. My parents still live there. I study Hebrew for now. And one of the things that's really struck me as a child, really, that's been really present from beginning of my life is that the narratives about the Jewish community of Poland, which is not really there anymore because most of them were murdered in the Holocaust and the rest is either in the United States or in Israel now. The memories of them are really still present in our national identity and the way we tell the stories of our past. As I started traveling to Israel, I realized that really there is a reciprocity in this relationship, and that for almost every Jewish person I've met, either in Israel or in the United States, there are always some strong associations with Poland, which either has to do with the Holocaust or years the community was there before. So I went there this summer again, took that time to research how they tell those stories of this past, how the immigrants who came, particularly the ones who came in the 10 years before the Second World War in the 1930s, and then those who came directly after, the ones who after the war did not anymore rebuild their lives in the country, as many still did. How they told these stories, how these stories entered the narratives that are common in society today. Here's just some pictures that kind of show different stages of this relationship. So one side we have the soldiers who are this Polish army which was marching from the Soviet Union through Iran and then British Palestine, went back to Europe. Many people stayed. Many Jews who were part of that army stayed in Israel while they were marching in Palestine. And then we have another picture of two people who immigrated from Poland to Israel. One of them before the one of them after, that they married later, visiting Poland again in 1980s and rebuilding the relationship. Just to show the two ways of immigration I'm going to talk about. One of them is one of, well, I was interested in the 1920s, 1930s, which is the biggest immigration from Europe, mostly driven either by ideology or by anti-Semitism, and usually by both. And the immigration of the post-war years, which was entering this community, which had already been somewhat built, had to adapt and accept this new identity, and those were the Holocaust survivors. Just to show quickly how Poland matters in Israel, first of all, as I said, there's this very big community that came from Poland. There are 3.5 million Jews in Poland, many of them went to Israel. Well, 2.9 million were murdered in the Holocaust, many others went to Israel. Many Israelis have descendants from Poland. David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, was Polish, as were many other. Very much the political scene of Israel was dominated by Polish and Russian in the beginning. And today, much of this relationship happens through memory, and memory mostly of the Holocaust. Some of those initiatives were starting in the early years of Israel, when bottom-up initiatives of people who, Holocaust survivors, who wanted to commemorate the communities. The Ghetto Fighters House was the first institution to commemorate Holocausts. Under the picture, it was established by fighters of who were fighting in uprisings in ghettos in the occupied Poland. And then political aspects of that, politics of memory, really. Which is an annual Holocaust Memorial Day. There's of course the Yad Vashem Institute, and what's important is that many young people every year from Israel visit Poland to see the Holocaust sites, and that's where, for many, the first encounter of the country. So that's what I did. I interviewed people. I researched archives. I also talked to people in Poland in the Jewish community to inform further the research. And so first of all, let's change this. The immigrants of the pre-war years are the ones who are really the ideology and anti-Semitism, and sometimes looking for opportunity play together. And this is a group that very much created defined what it means to be to be an Israeli Jew? Well, how is it different from being a diaspora Jew, and how is it different from being part of any other nation? And there's one story in the many stories, but one really struck me as being representative of the factors played in those decisions to emigrate. Was a story of Shula Leviel. She left Poland in 1934 with her parents, and so she tells me that her parents were Zionists, because they believed in the idea of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And then her dad first left to look for a job, to find a place for the family to live, to prepare it for the family to emigrate later. But he didn't find a job. He returned, and actually the situation in Poland improved, so they decided to stay. Some pragmatic reasons really convinced them to stay, and it was not really until Hitler's rise to power that motivated their immigration. Sometimes immigration was caused by strong negative experiences in Poland and of the Polish people themselves, and these are the times where we can really quite easily explain perhaps why those people wanted to forget Polish language, Polish culture, why they wanted to find something completely new. There's one person whose parents just refused to learn Polish at home because of her dad's experience in the Polish army and from some of his other soldiers. For others, really, it was less of experience of Poland, but just the fact that coming to Palestine before or after the war, when there was no country, there was just too much precarity, too much to think about, too much to care about, too much. It was too hard to sustain family, to think about identity issues, and becoming Israeli, learning Hebrew was more of a necessity than anything too conscious. But then, very often the experience was different. So I want to make a transition with this quote from one of the people I interviewed, who gave herself as the best example of what a nation can do. And she talks about the Poles. On one hand, the Polish nuns in a monastery saved her, kept her there during the Holocaust, so that she wasn't found and murdered by the Nazis. On the other hand, the other Poles turned in her mother to the Germans, and the mother was killed. But both of these attitudes was important. In both of these cases, the Poles relate to the Jewish people as others, and either they pity them or feel some solidarity with them and want to help them, or they turn them in perhaps for personal benefit. But there's this idea of the other, and similarly works the identity on the other side. And we, in fact, before the war, it's quite clear that the Jewish community in Palestine defined both the nations of Europe and the Jews who stayed in Europe as the others. So we have, for example, one person who was brought as an orphan after the war to Palestine, much against his will, and found that there was quite little compassion for him in the community that he found there. Others, for example, Shimon Reddy, he's a professor of history, and he came there quite willingly after the war, and just being Zionist, being Israeli, made him forget about his Polish past for quite a while. And it was not until 70s and 80s when the borders became more open that he realized that this is something he can care about, and perhaps that's his responsibility as a historian to care about. Others kept the identity from the beginning, just kind of consciously and willingly staying on the margin of Israeli society. Like this professor Jan Michał Gruszkiewicz is a neurosurgeon, but he never felt Israeli because he just kept his Polish culture and he kept writing those poems that really relate to the issues that are very close to Polish consciousness identity. So to end with, here is a picture of Shula Leviel, who I interviewed with Janka Filozofowa, who is a Pole who saved Jews during the war, meeting again in 1987 when Scholl traveled for the first time to Poland. And just a symbol of this rebuilding of the connection between the two peoples. This one is quite an obvious connection because of the solidarity we felt during the war. For many others, this connection is not as clear, and rebuilding this connection, besides the two identities being very different and often contradictory, is really what's very important now and what the program is portraying. Thank you.
Hello again, I'm Sarah Bellingham, this is Max Toomey. We hail from the Columbia Journalism School, where we actually graduated from last December. So People for Trump started out as our master's thesis at Columbia, and it's kind of in two parts. So this first part is an election arc. We follow this grassroots group of Trump supporters in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, through the election. And after we graduated, thanks to the Pulitzer Center, we were actually able to continue following these people to see how they felt since the election ended. And Max is going to play a little teaser for you from the election.
And then we'll talk about it some more.
Our candidate Donald Trump gets elected. All the people that have doubted him forever are going to sit back at around midnight, and they're going to talk about how this happened.
You don't know us.
My womanly instinct is to go with Trump. He doesn't hide it. He doesn't sugarcoat it. Politicians, they don't tell you the truth about things. It's not just Clinton, it's a lot of them.
Every house that you knock on, every voter that you talk to, could literally be the reason we win or lose the state.
Excuse me.
That's the first politics I ever got involved with. I've never knocked on doors before. I've never called people. I've never put the word out.
It isn't about Donald Trump. It's about change. I don't see him being a bully. I see him as a guy that's got a fuse now. I don't have a problem with that.
I'm just an American citizen that wants America to be, as Donald said, great again, somewhere safe to live. I know maybe this is wrong to say, but all Muslims aren't terrorists. All terrorists are Muslims.
Who has a really good feeling that we're going to win in Bucks County in the 8th?
If he wins Bucks County, good chance he wins Pennsylvania.
And when you win the state of Pennsylvania, you're the President of the United States of America.
People for the number 4, Trump.
Yeah. So I guess I first wanted to talk a little bit about the area that we were in. So we went to Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I think, can everyone hear me at the back? Shall I speak up a bit? I need the mic? We went to Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I feel weird holding this now. Which is kind of East Pennsylvania. It's a suburb outside of Philadelphia that we first became interested in because of these kind of Levitt towns. We picked Bucks because electorally it's really interesting. It's split pretty much right down the middle. It's almost as Democrat as it is Republican. And when trying to figure out how to tell an election story, we were like, let's go somewhere that's going to be like really important. Pennsylvania's the swing state that every election seems to not swing. As, you know, it's been blue for 20 years up until now. And kind of the way we thought about Bucks was the way that Bucks County goes is the way that Pennsylvania goes. And as Jim, you saw, we're going to talk about in a bit, says the way that Pennsylvania goes is the way that the country goes.
You got that right.
Yeah. So Max and I landed in Bucks County thinking, okay, how do we tell this story? How do we show what's really going on the ground, for this election, and especially such a chaotic election, right from the primaries. And we ended up wandering into this meeting with a man named Jim Worthington, who's the man who you saw at the podium there. Now, Jim is a very wealthy man. He owns property all over Bucks County. He owns a very ritzy fitness center, and he was using his fitness center to host these meetings. Now, Jim actually spent a bit of his fortune on a delegate race. So he became involved with politics through going to the RNC. He spent $30,000. There were posters everywhere at every polling station during the primaries. There were, robocalls. He completely blitzed it, which is generally unheard of for a delegate position, right? So Jim comes back to Bucks County and is, he's psyched about Trump, and then he finds out that the local GOP didn't like Trump. They liked Kasich, and in spite of the fact that the Republicans in the county had voted for Trump in the primary, they weren't really going to be campaigning for him. So the group started up.
So yeah, Jim calls this kind of first meeting that we go to in his pool house, literally outside of the gym. And we go along kind of to this meeting thinking, we'll just go and make some contacts, we'll kind of figure out what's interesting, maybe meet some of the 20 people that might show up. And there were easily like 100 people crammed into this tiny space by a pool. And we suddenly realized that we'd found something really interesting. So ran back to the car. We were driving a Prius at the time, which I don't think introduced us too well. And kind of started filming this meeting and interviewing Jim and kind of talking about what was important to him. And from that, isolating kind of some of the other characters that Sarah's going to talk about.
Yeah, so we ended up meeting Michelle Schwab, who's the blonde woman who unfortunately is, she's very xenophobic, she's very Islamophobic, and she is genuinely afraid for her safety. She's bought into this narrative that immigration is a threat, that it is a physical threat to her, that it's something that's going to take jobs away, and she genuinely believed that Trump could protect her. Bobby, who Max will pull up, Bobby was a woman who, for her, 1950s America were the good old days. Good old days for whom? Well, for her, they were a golden era, and she saw Trump as someone who would be able to return America to that state. Also a Tea Partier.
So yeah, one of the things I think we found really interesting about this whole kind of experience was the media diet that they were on. So Michelle watches Fox News. Bobby gets most of her news from Facebook and from kind of emails that she subscribed to from things like Tea Party blogs and from Breitbart. So we realized that along the way, we were living in just very, very different worlds to kind of try and explore that a fair bit throughout the film. And we also kind of try and explore kind of how Michelle feels about Islamophobia. So we end up kind of trying to discuss with her about how she ever met a Muslim.
And I should say, for the Q&A, ask Max about his experience going to Michelle's old church that was sold during the election season to become a mosque. So they actually go back into that.
I think the other thing we found interesting in terms of identity was this cognitive bias they had that was kind of, there was literally nothing that could ever be Trump's fault. It was kind of like once they decided on their guy, he was kind of the empty vessel which they put all of their kind of hopes and dreams and like opinions on what a strong candidate and president should be.
Yeah. So all of the characters stayed very strongly supporting Trump through the election. After the election, spoiler, they are all still very, very much on board. And this group, in spite of the campaign being over, has stayed together. They are quite active. In fact, they had a meeting again last Saturday that we went and filmed. I think our final round of filming. Let's see, would you like to talk about the political candidates Jim's bringing in?
So yeah, I think the other interesting bit, right, is that so when we finished the first film after the election, everyone's going, we're so happy. Jim is still dissatisfied. He goes, he still doesn't trust the local GOP. He's still not happy with how things are. And he goes, I'm going to keep all these people that I've got together, and we're going to pick our own candidates, and we're going to support our own local candidates. And since then, people kind of from like local councillors to like people running in the like governor primaries have been like attending these meetings, making pitches to people for Trump to go, hey, with your support, with you guys knocking on doors for me, I can become the next governor, I can become the next councillor, I can become the next state senator. So kind of Jim has become this serious local powerhouse, almost. Yeah. Great. Thanks so much.
Hi, so my name is Lila Franco, and as I said before, my project was in Venezuela, and I'm gonna start with the video first to give like a general view. Okay, so what's going on there? I went to Venezuela this summer, and if you have kept up with what's going on there, you know that there was this wave of riots after the Supreme Court decided to remove the power of the National Assembly. So these whole riots started, and they kind of died down after the elections of July 30 for a constituent assembly. Just so you know what happened there. So what happened after that? Inflation went like to the sky. So you guys have like an idea. When I was going there in August, I exchanged dollars for 8,000. When I was there, the price was already 16,000, and yesterday it was 36,000. So that's how much inflation change. It's really high. So the National Assembly say it was like 176%, but the Monetary Fund did a survey and said that by the end of this year it's going to reach 1,100%. So there's high inflation. Why did it change? How do we see this in physical real life? So we are governed by the black market because there are so many policies and economic policies in place that do not allow Venezuelans to access to foreign currency. So basically, if you want to buy legally dollars, you will have to go through several processes. Right now, the one that is in order is an auction. So you bid for how many dollars you want, how much you want, but like nobody gets it. Still, you have to fulfill like a list of requisites, and so it's very tricky. So everyone goes for the black market. So what's happening with these economic policies? So I already say there's a high inflation, and there's also a control of the prices in the market. So many companies have to close down because they cannot sell, for example, milk that for them producing is maybe $10 for $2. That's what the government wants. The milk does not cost $2, just saying. So much cheaper. That's one of the reasons there's scarce resources. And the other one is the government to control over the national production of many goods. So, and those companies actually died down. So, there's no national production. There's no free market, just to say it like that. So, we have a crisis, and it's not only in food. It's also in medicines, clothes, repair parts for cars. So whatever you wanna, you're not gonna find it probably. And when I'm talking about medicines, I'm talking about birth control, Advil, and I'm not even gonna go into like if you have like any serious conditions like HIV, like there's nothing for that there. Like I say, there's a lot of trash, and one of the things this has brought is people eating from the trash. Like this national NGO, made this research and found out that 10% of the population is actually eating from trash, which is the trash is not only like bringing disease to the zones where it is, which is basically every part, but also to the people who's eating it. There's like long lines, like I said, there's no products, nobody knows what's going to be there in the supermarket, so you basically have to go every day to try to find sugar, milk, toilet paper, deodorant, shampoo, whatever you need for your daily life. It's probably not gonna be there, so people go every day to the market, and like these lines can go from like 30 minutes to 4 hours. I actually was in a 4 hours line for toilet paper once. Yeah. Here I want to point out this is a picture from this community of kids that live in the street. I catch it later that I wanted to, but if you see in the first picture, you see in the second picture, you can see the kid eating from the trash, and it turns out that that part is where one of the locals that is in that building takes out the trash and they just eat there. This group of kids, it's like right now I think it's 36 or 28, no, 36 or 38. And you can see them asking for money, eating from the trash, and they're basically homeless. No, they're homeless kids. So what is people doing there? No, like what is the government doing about this situation? Like they're not doing anything right now. The institutions do not work properly as they should. There's a lot of like government, corruption. Yes, there's a lot of corruption and extortion of our officials if you actually want something to work. Like, for example, if you want to legalize your title, your graduate title, that will be, you will have to pay maybe probably like around $50 in the conversion rate. One of the stories was in there about the airport. You can see the corruption there because there's like so many National Guards there that will ask you where you're going with, and if you're coming back, and then they might stop you, and many people have to pay some sort of money to be allowed to continue. And one of the people I interviewed told me that they took her shampoo, her snacks, I'm missing something else, and $20 from her. And therefore it's interesting because airlines are leaving the country, or many companies are leaving the country, and now there are only 12 airlines left in the country. So you can find the long lines, the corruption there. But what do we have is a lot of government propaganda around the whole city. You can see it from posters to ads, TV ads around the whole city. Like one of the things that it's now a thing, I guess, it's the eyes of Hugo Chavez, who is the late president. He is the main figure of this whole movement, I guess. This is outside one of the National Electric Company, so you can see there's some historical figures, and then there is Chavez, and that's where the flags from the video were, also the Cuba flag next to the Venezuelan flag in that company. And one of the things that I thought it was interesting was like you can see like in the Twitter introduction that Nicolas Maduro have, who's the president right now, is son of Chavez, which like says a lot about the whole movement. Thank you.
So, Macau being like a former colony and like gaining the semi-independent status in 1999, I think so. When you look at a lot of like post-colonial countries, you see this like project of like building nationalism and like trying to forge an identity that's like separate and unique from whatever the colonizing country was. So how do you think that fits into sort of what you identified as like the retreat of the Portuguese identity from Macau? Like how does that play into what's happening? Just maybe, is there like a sort of this project of building a national identity, being that it was a former colony?
That's a good question, and from what I've noticed, there's actually, instead of a big push for a Macanese nationalistic perspective and tradition, they're actually just kind of switching from heavily Portuguese influence to heavily influenced by mainland China. So 0.6%, like I said, is the amount of households that have Portuguese as their native language. But Macanese actually was a dialect of Portuguese, and it's a very specific mixture between Portuguese and Cantonese. But that is actually virtually extinct. So I think that's a good example that there's not necessarily a push from people who are born and raised in Macau for them to have their own identity. They're more trying to identify with mainland China because that's where most people who live there now are from. Like there's only 16,000 Macanese people in Macau out of 600,000 people who live there. So the vast majority of people there are mainland Chinese, or at least mainland Chinese descendants. So that's mostly the push. It's not necessarily for their own identity, but for more of association with mainland China.
When you answer questions, can you already pass the microphone around?
Oh,
please?
sorry.
It's okay.
I can't deal with that.
I had a follow-up for you. So, did you not see were there no schools that taught Portuguese at all? Is that something that virtually no one was interested in, or was there some interest? And I mean that as probably like a second language.
So there is a Portuguese school of Macau for kids and like a high school, but mostly the kids who go there are the sons of the children of people who are work for the Portuguese consulate, or people whose parents are somewhat representatives of the Portuguese government. But the University of Macau has a very strong Portuguese department. But the problem is most people who study Portuguese at those institutions are not people who are residents of Macau. There are people from mainland China who go there strictly to study the language. So they have a partnership with Guangzhou University. So they have a strong Portuguese department. They will send their students to Macau to study the language. But there's a Portuguese, I don't know the name in English, but it's the Instituto Português do Oriente, which is they made a partnership with the government. So they offer free Portuguese classes to any resident of Macau. So I talked to the consulate, and they told me that they're satisfied with the enrollment, but it's way below what they expected when they started this program, especially because it's free.
Yeah, Alina? So, I want to say this question in the right way, because it's kind of a heavy subject. So when the Western media talks about child marriages, there tends to be a narrative of the older men when there are young children marrying older men. The narrative tends to focus on the men also being monsters or perverts or so on. And that certainly doesn't seem to be the case with the man that you spoke to, he also seemed to be forced into it. Do you, in your experience from your reporting, did you find that the general narrative around child marriage is wrong from in the West?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I definitely see this on. Can you guys hear me?
No.
Okay, is it working now? Yeah. Okay. I see where you're coming from. For my untold story, I specifically chose to focus on one couple because I did not want to generalize child marriage. Because as the video, one of the introductory slides said, child marriage can be arranged for a variety of reasons, and sometimes it's not even arranged. Sometimes it's just a love marriage in India. So I think it's wrong to just generalize it and try to just use one viewpoint on a topic that there are so many nuances to it. That's why I chose to focus on one specific couple, and that's why I also chose to include both, although my project was focused on just women, I chose to include the interviews of both the wife and the husband. Because if I only included the wife, it would seem like, oh, she was the only one who didn't have a voice in the marriage, but both of them did, right? So I think it's good that you asked that question, and so I just wanted to make clear what my intentions were with that story, so that's why I specifically chose to focus on one couple instead of generalizing, because I think that would be a colossal mistake.
Question. My question is for Tomek. First of all, thank you for your presentation. But I want to approach this question a bit sensitively because I know this issue can be a bit, can bring emotions into the conversation. So you talk about the rise of fascist politics in 20th century Europe as a strong impetus for Polish Jews to migrate to Palestine. And you gave some examples of Polish Jews or descendants of Polish Jews who still very much carry their trauma with them in Palestine. But oftentimes those of us who carry our trauma with us makes us more empathetic, or it makes us more inclined to stand in solidarity with people facing similar injustices. So I guess my question in all this is, in the conversations that you had with the descendants of Polish Jews living in Palestine, if you ever brought up the conversation about Palestinians, or if you ever did a comparison between the policies of the Israeli state and the policies instituted in fascist Europe in the 20th century.
Yeah, so it came up explicit. It didn't come too often, and there's actually an important observation too from my project is that the Jews who came from Poland, being in Palestine and Israel, in general they maybe they don't want to think about it. Maybe the conviction of the Jewish right to have a state is really. I mean, it definitely is the priority in the values with regards to the issue. I think it it came up. It came up sometimes though. And one of the persons I talked to really did talk about the politics in Israel now and the rise of far right there. The Minister of Education right now is a very right politician who is involved with the settlement enterprise who was the leader pretty much of the settlers who settle in the Palestinian territories. And what she told me is that Holocaust didn't teach people much, and that they didn't teach the other Jewish people who are in Israel now that much. That the way it exists in the Israeli narrative is very much so that it fits with the justification of a Jewish state in the first place, and not in more broad ideas of solidarity. And I think that's exactly. I mean that reflects at least to some extent what happened, because if we look at some of the first. So after the Second World War, the Jews in Israel really had this question how to reconcile the pre-existing Zionist ideology, which was very much that the spirit of Jewish struggle, of fighting for the right of their own land, and then the memories of the victims who really did not fit into that Zionist ideal of a fighter. They're more seen as a passive European Jews. And actually, from the beginning, the narratives that from the Holocaust that started having most impact in Israel were the ones about ghetto uprisings, about the times where the Jews were fighting in Europe against the Nazi occupiers. So I think to an extent that probably explains it, that this more human, this aspect that did not really fit with the nationalist narrative did not get that much force in the beginning, and it's really been, I think, until the 70s, 80s, people in Israel were so involved with, well, at least those who decided to commit themselves, who felt at home in Israel, were so involved with creating this new identity and with responding to the precarity which the state was facing, that these questions did not arise. And I mean, they are asked maybe today, but it's the next generation that are asking them, and I think much of what was in the memories of the survivors, also with regards to solidarity with others. I mean, solidarity with many of the Poles and Jews, there was also a lot of instances of solidarity, and that's been forgotten, and instead it's just much more introspective narrative.